that breach is there, then it makes you vulnerable if you're divided. Vulnerable what? If you're in the choir and you don't like how the tenors sound and the tenors don't like how the sopranos sound, it makes you vulnerable to attack. So if you think about that, what's going on them, they're weakened now because they're separated, and they were attacked by several enemies. The Syrians, the enemies of Moab, which we call the Moabites, and then the king of Ammon, we call the Ammonites, close by people. Then there were people a long way off, Assyria and Babylon, and so they were under attack. That's where we're going to pick up today. This attack was so bad that people were in what we call a famine, but it was much worse than a famine, as you'll see. Turn to chapter 7. You have 2 Kings yet? If you don't have it, tell your neighbor, turn 2 Kings. I'll show you where to find it. 2 Kings, chapter 7. Read along with me out loud just the first 9 verses of 2 Kings, chapter 7. We're going to read together aloud. What? 2 Kings 7, verses 1 through 9. Ready? Read. Then Elijah said, "Hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria." Then the Lord, on whose hand the king leaned, answered the man of God, and so said, "Behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be?" And he said, "Behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not eat thereof." And there were 4 leprous men at the entering in of the gate. And they said one to another, "Why sit we here until we die? If we say, we will enter into the city, then the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. And if we sit here, we die also. Now therefore come, and let us fall unto the host of the Syrians. If they save us alive, we shall live. And if they kill us, we shall die." And they rose up in the twilight to go unto the camp of the Syrians. And when they were come to the uttermost part of the camp of Syria, behold, there was no man there. For the Lord had made the host of the Syrians to hear a noise of chariots and the noise of horses, even the noise of a great host. And they said one to another, "Lo, the king of Israel hath hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to come upon us." Therefore they arose and fled in the twilight, and left their tents and their horses and their asses, even the camp as it was, and fled for their life. And when these lepers came to the uttermost part of the camp, they went into one tent and did eat and drink, and carried thence silver and gold and raiment, and went and hid it, and came again, and then into another tent, and carried thence also, and went and hid it. Then they said one to another, "We do not do well. This day is a day of good tidings, and we hold our peace. If we tarry till the morning light, some mischief will come upon us. Now therefore come, that we may go and tell the king's household." I want to focus, thank you very much. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading and hearing of his word. I want to focus for a few moments on verse 3 of the 7th chapter we just read. And there were 4 leprous men at the entering in of the gate, and they said one to another, "Why sit we here until we die?" Grab your neighbor by the hand, even if they're in your seat, and say, "Neighbor, oh neighbor, the preacher wants to preach about you cannot get what God has for you staying where you are." Tell the one on the other side person didn't like you, say, "You cannot get what God has for you staying where you are." This time in our text is a very sad time in the northern kingdom. The capital city of Samaria was starving to death. They were in desperate times, and in desperate times, people do desperate things. Chapter 6 tells us that about this time, donkey head burgers were selling for $50, while dove's dung was considered a delicacy. And you thought the United States was in a recession. But Israel had forgotten two things. One, they had a heavenly Father who could provide a miracle, and they'd forgotten to have the right kind of faith to expect a miracle. Made two mistakes. They'd forgotten God who could provide a miracle, and they forgot to have the faith, Elder Cheryl, that could what? Expect a miracle. Anybody been there? Where times are so hard and situations look so bleak that you kind of get spiritual amnesia. It's not that you forget about God, it's just that it's been so long since you had any manifestation of his power that you spent all your time in Mount Sinai and Nah. Not Mount Sinai, Mount Sinai and Nah. Israel was going through that, but God did the unexpected and the impossible, sending an invisible angelic army. He caused the Syrian army to turn tail and run. And they left behind all their money, all their Gucci, all their Fiorucci, all their Fendi, and their clothing. And then they ran away and said, oh God, they've hired some people to get us because God caused this miracle of deliverance. I love the Bible. Because isn't it strange that in a book called Kings, we find the hero for Samaria to be for lepers. Leprosy, now, please understand, this is not chicken pox. Woo, leprosy is a bad disease. Another Bible study tip for you. Whenever you read leprosy in the Bible, in the physical, you know it's a physical disease, but in the spiritual, it represents sin. Why? Because leprosy, the condition starts in the inside and manifests on the outside. In other words, when you first get it, people don't know you got it. But the longer you keep it, people begin to see some signs on you that'll let you know that you have it. I'm preaching in here. When you were a leper, you could not walk into the presence of society people. You had to yell out, unclean, unclean. You could not go back into society. You were an unclean person yelling to unclean people. Oh God. You had to have a press conference to apologize for having adultery to people who are involved in adultery. Unclean. You had to go to prison for 23 months and get out and apologize to dogs. I'm sorry. It's a bad condition, this thing called leprosy. In everybody's minds, you got a condition like that, it looks hopeless. These boys begin to talk, and they say, well, let's look at this thing. If we stay here, we're going to die. If we go, we're going to die, so let's just go. But they made a decision to say, we can't get what God has for us, staying where we are. The essence of this sermon, hear me good,